Welcome back to Football Daily. Today we're looking at your club's biggest problem. That's right, the agree or disagree format is back. Now, I put a tweet out during the week asking for each club's biggest problems. I got over 200 responses, so I've got a problem for every single one of the Premier League clubs, except for Luton. Not a single Luton fan replied to my tweet. If you're a Luton fan, get involved. It's stressed me out. You know how this works by now. I'm going to flash the statement up on screen. I'm then going to tell you if and why I agree or disagree. Let's get straight into it, alphabetical order, with the Arsenal. This one comes in from AFCSE. Now, there were loads of suggestions for Arsenal, but I picked this one because it felt like the most topical. He says, the relentless use of Bukayo Saka. Although he is a talismanic player for us, the poor bloke needs a rest, and last night was a perfect example of that. We now run the risk of losing him for the City game, arguably the most important of the season. This annoys me. And I'll tell you why it annoys me. Because for me, you don't rest your best players, especially in Champions League games, and especially when you're 7 games into the season. If we were 40 games in, I would totally understand it. 7 games in, Bukayo Saka does not need a rest in an away match in the Champions League. One of the most vital games so far this season, you do not rest your best players. You know, last season, Saka, about 3,700 minutes across the domestic competitions, the Premier League. For Arsenal, 37-ish, 100 minutes. Also, 300 minutes the World Cup, so let's say 4,000 minute ballpark season for Saka last year. Haaland, 4,000 minute season last year. Salah, around a 4,000 minute season. The best players play the most minutes. It is just a fact. Lens away was a big game for Arsenal. You know, you didn't see City resting Haaland away at Leipzig because it's a big game and he's the best player. You know, Arsenal have plenty of really good players. Saliba, Ødegaard, Martinelli, Declan Rice. But Saka is the one. He is their best player. Like AFCSE says, he's the talisman. You don't rest your talisman. Salah does not get rested in the big games. Saka shouldn't either. He's 22 years old. PSG weren't resting Kylian Mbappe at 22 because he was their best player. You play your best players. Unless it's an absolute ridiculous situation where fixture congestion, 30 games into the season, he clearly is absolutely shattered. Saka is a victim of being kicked because he's so good. I understand that. But I just, you know, United don't rest Bruno. Salah doesn't get rested by Liverpool. Arsenal should not be resting Saka. Moving on to Villa, and MC says, every time Emery tries to rotate, we lose, and he will need to. 4 cup games in a row lost. Players like Olsen or Tielemans are a massive downgrade. So let's talk about it. I guess you can kind of extrapolate from an MC's point that he feels like depth and rotation are the biggest problems for Aston Villa, because they are in a lot of cup competitions. You know, the Europa League does tire you out, doesn't it? So they are going to need to rotate, and I kind of agree. I'm a little bit surprised at how poor some of the players that have come in to replace the starters have been. You know, Youri Tielemans, I think, is a fabulous player. He hasn't lit the world alight, has he, so far at Aston Villa? He's definitely not going to dispose Boubacar Kamara or Douglas Luiz anytime soon. And he does look a little bit leggy, especially when he's paired with somebody like Dendoncker, who's also not the fastest in that midfield role. But caveating this, players like Tielemans need time. This is a new side, a new system. Emery's tactics are extremely demanding, and he is going to take a little bit of time to get used to it. I think he's a fantastic player, so I'm not writing him off by any means. But for now, the rotation hasn't quite worked. Tonight's a must-win against Zrinski. Probably pronounced that all sorts of wrong. But a must-win against the Bosnian champions. And I think they will win. I'm shooting this Thursday at 5 o'clock. If they lose, I'm going to look like a right mug. Going on to Bournemouth, and the suggestion from Chung is reliance on Solanke, both scoring and building up. So he feels like there's an over-reliance on Dom Solanke, and you can see why. 3 goals and an assist so far this season for Solanke before that injury. Only 2 other players in the Bournemouth squad have scored a goal. So they are one of the lowest scoring sides in the league right now. But I'm going to disagree with this one. I'm afraid I am going to disagree. I think their fixture list, given they've played Liverpool, Tottenham, Chelsea, Arsenal, Brentford and Brighton, is the biggest problem. Like, Solanke, yes, there is going to be a reliance on him to score goals because he is the 9 for them and pretty much everything goes through him. But when Alex Scott returns, we haven't really seen a fully fit Dango Ouattara yet. I think he's only played 90 minutes once so far this season, and that was in the Cup, wasn't it? Semenyo still yet to find his best form. I think Bournemouth will be less reliant on him when these players start to come back, find their fitness. I don't think that's going to be a problem for them in the long term necessarily. A little bit more of a problem for me as well is that defensive midfielder. Tyler Adams, I'm not sure it was an injury setback. Still doesn't seem like he's anywhere near it. And without him, Zach raised this point on Sunday Vibes. Without him and not signing another defensive midfielder, that feels like a major issue. So I'm going to disagree with an over-reliance on Solanke because I do think the fixtures have just been a disaster. And Iraola will be fine when he starts to not face the big six, basically. However, they do need to start scoring some goals. At Brentford, the lad tweeted in and deleted his suggestion, so I'm not going to be able to put it on screen, but he is suggesting lack of depth. I think this is another one I'm going to disagree with. I feel like I'm really disagreeing with a lot of own fans' opinions, which is just never a good look, is it? But I don't think a lack of depth has necessarily been the problem for Brentford this season. I think their biggest problem has been goals. And mainly goals from the Tony replacements or cover in Mbeumo and Visser. Mbeumo started the season so well, but 1 goal in his last 7 games in all competitions. Visser, 1 goal in his last 7 games in all competitions. Kevin Schade, out for an extended period of time now with that hip injury. And Mbeumo is a brilliant player. And, arguably you could say they were robbed against Nottingham Forest with the penalty decision that went against them. But those two are both putting up like 0.5, 0.4, 0.5 non-penalty expected goals per 90 so far this season. And especially in Visser's case, underperforming a little bit. The goals have got to start coming from those two really fairly soon. Because without Tony scoring at the rate he was last season, they're going to need to get over the line somehow. Now, having said this, they play Man United on Saturday, and I'm convinced Mbeumo is going to score a brace. Jinxed us. Brighton. This one came in from Daniel Stabler. He says, the structural and financial constraints of elite football mean that bigger, lazier and worse run clubs can attempt to treat my club like a marketplace for talents. He says this is a problem. I think this is fantastic for Brighton. How is this a problem? Unearthing these gems, £5 million, and then selling them for £100 million is by no means a problem. The business Tony Bloom is doing is absolutely perfect. It is genius. Brighton are flying. Yes, they've had a couple of poor results. The 6-1 against Villa came out of nowhere. That was a bit of a surprise. Massive game tonight as well against Marseille. But how the club is run and the fact that big clubs want to come and poach some of your talent is by no means a problem. Caicedo was a huge overpayment. Cucurella, a huge overpayment. Even 25 million for Sanchez, really good business. I do not think the fact that clubs are coming in and paying exuberant amounts of fees for Brighton players is in any way an issue. I actually think it's a huge positive. Don't really get this one. Okay, Burnley up next. Danny Boyo says, Vinny not sticking with players that got us promoted. He goes on to mention the likes of Charlie Taylor, missing out on Maatson, no real backup for Foster. But overall, he's kind of talking here about, bedding in new players. I'm doing it again here. I just don't think that's Burnley's biggest problem right now. I actually think that Vinny has to bed new talent in. I think when you're a newly promoted side, you've got to get your new signings cooking as quickly as possible. The less time it takes them to adapt to the league, the better. So the likes of Amdouni, the likes of Koleosho have to be bedded in straight away. They do. Even at the back, you've got to get players bedded. You've got to get Trafford bedded in the sticks ASAP. So I don't think necessarily it's a case of not giving other players chances. I just think that when you come to the Premier League, you've got to be backing new talent that can perform, you believe can perform to a new level. Sheffield United and Luton, to a large level, I know they don't have the same money Burnley do, have backed the talent that got them out of the Championship. And I think in the long term, it's going to hurt them. In the short term, maybe I see it as a bit of an issue for Burnley. But the fixtures have been City, Villa, Spurs, United, Newcastle, and they've got Chelsea next. The fixtures have been horrible. I'm going to disagree with this one. I think for Burnley, the real problem is goals. Again, I know that Lyle Foster had his ban, but Amdouni's missed some big chances. He's got to find his feet soon. And the only way he does that is by being on the pitch, in my opinion. He's missed some big chances. The goal's going to come. Next up for Chelsea, we've got Aura. He says, scoring goals. Yes, this one is absolutely nailed on. I think by XG, they should have scored 13, 14. They've scored 7. So again, like last season, like the season before that, massive underperformance in the penalty area. You know, Nicholas Jackson, the biggest underperformer of expected goals of any player in the Premier League. I don't want to lay this all at his feet, but has looked a little bit shaky in terms of his finishing. There's definitely a player in there. Holds onto the ball really well, carries the ball really well. Just looks like he snatches a little bit of his chances. So he's going to have to calm down. Although I think Brogier's return looks very positive. Thought it looked really good against Fulham, even though he missed a sitter as well. The goals are going to come for Chelsea. The underlying numbers are actually all right. They're actually all right. They've just got to get Nkunku back fit somehow. Don't rush him. Get him back in the side. But clearly, yeah. Goals, again, the problem for the Blues. Magnum has Palace's suggestion. He says for Crystal Palace, it's injuries mixed with a lack of squad depth. Yeah, man. I really feel for Roy Hodgson. The injuries have just been absolutely horrible, haven't they? 9 of the 25 first-team players have either got an injury currently or experienced an injury so far. I'd say 5 or 6 of them as well starters, really. When you think Dean Henderson, brand new signing, was bought in for a not inconsiderable £20 million, injured straight away. França, Zaha's replacement, injured straight away. Jefferson Lerma, their midfield side, injured straight away. Now Elise has been out for an extended period, really. And we see Eze this week pick up a 6-week injury. It's a disaster, really. The injury front has been a disaster. I think even Odsonne Edouard's got an injury now. And when you couple this with a lack of spending, it does come back to bite you, doesn't it? I mean, I think just 35-ish million spent in the summer, the second lowest amount in the Premier League. 20 of that went on França. 15, 20 went on Dean Henderson. And then Jefferson Lerma came in on a free. I think only Luton Town spent less. That's not ideal, especially when you have 9 injuries to kick the season off. We go into Everton next, and Eamon says, one for us is the ownership. That needs to get sorted so we can get a new board, which should almost be like a new start, and get rid of Sean Dyche. With the players, our squad is stronger than the promoted sides. In my opinion, our tactics are bad. Wow. Okay, well, which one should I take here? Let's take his take on Sean Dyche, because the ownership situation, well documented. You know, we covered it on Explained as well very recently. I'll flash the thumbnail up on screen now, so you haven't already watched our Explained on the Everton ownership situation. Go and watch that now. Let's tackle Sean Dyche. I firmly disagree with the notion of sacking Sean Dyche. I actually think Everton have been pretty unfortunate. Their underlying numbers look very, very solid, almost mid-table level solid. They've got Dominic Calvert-Lewin back now. I think Dwight McNeil is playing really well. It's not the most attractive brand of football, and I understand this. Everton fans want to be playing a more attractive brand of football, certainly. But I don't think Everton are a million miles away from clicking. I think the result away at Brentford proved that they really have something there. They were miles better than Brentford. Miles. They beat Villa in the cup as well. And then they have this weird thing going on at Goodison Park where they're just so susceptible. They go and win those 2 games and then they lose to Luton. The lack of consistency is enraging, but I'm convinced that Sean Dyche is the best manager right now to keep Everton in the division and maybe even push them up the table. I think if you sack Sean Dyche now, you open yourself up to a world of pain. Our Fulham suggestion comes from big Fulham fan himself, of course, JCC. You'll probably know him from Pro Clubs on YouTube. He says goals. And I would agree. You know, they lost Mitrovic in the summer. They didn't replace him. They replaced him with Raul Jimenez. Didn't score a goal last season. Hasn't scored a goal this season. It's not looking great in the forward department. I'm a little bit surprised that Carlos Vinicius hasn't started more games. But, you know, Tim Ream is the current top scorer up there. They don't create loads of chances and they don't score many goals. I'm worried about Fulham this season. Next up, we've got Liverpool. This one was sent in by Philly. He says, no starting DM. Mac is good, but would much prefer him as an 8-10, and Endo is just a rotation. Disagree. Clearly, yes, they do need a defensive midfielder. We're all aware of that. We can see it, but I just think it's a little bit boring. I actually like the midfield composition with Szoboszlai and McAllister. It's not perfect, but it's going to be a lot better when Trent comes back, when he can start inverting and playing that box midfield. The midfield means they can play 4 going forward, and that 4 are creating chances for fun, they're scoring goals for fun, the XG's through the roof. They're so good to watch, Liverpool, right now. And I know that the DM is an issue, but I think their bigger problem is the PGMOL. Honestly, they've been shafted. The PGMOL has been their problem, not the DM. Luton Town, as I said, no fan suggested anything. I'm deleting them. Sorry, Luton. Please get involved. I really want you to start getting involved, but I got no suggestions. Hadders has the Manchester City suggestion. He says, squad depth. It's a myth that we have 2 starting 11s and City's B team will get top 4. We have a thin squad right now, and a bit of rotation clearly shows that we cannot afford to rest certain players. I kind of agree with this one, and I kind of disagree. It's a bit of a difficult one. I'll put it in the agree column for now. I definitely think there are a couple of holes in the squad that could be improved, but this narrative of we don't have much depth, I just think is nonsense, because I think the versatility of players is so key to how Pep Guardiola plays and his overall philosophy that you don't necessarily need 2 full starting 11s. Bernardo Silva's versatility and how much of a Swiss Army knife of a player he is almost one of the things that makes him so special and makes him so perfect for Pep Guardiola. So would you hinder that in order to get another player in? I don't know. And would you bring another player in to stop the development of a player like Rico Lewis, who we saw as one of the best players on the pitch against Leipzig? I'm not totally sold on the fact that they need all this extra squad depth. I think I'm changing this. I think City's biggest problem has been the Rodri red. That moment of madness from Rodri against Nottingham Forest, that effectively, in my opinion, cost them the cup game. And maybe that's why they're pointing to the lack of defensive midfield cover. But Nunez, Kovacic, Phillips, they should have been able to get the job done there. I just think Rodri's head loss was the biggest problem. I think the squad is perfectly deep enough. Pep likes a small squad. The signings in the summer were very exciting. Extra midfield bodies were bought in. Doku looks great. Rodri just lost his head. Manchester United had endless suggestions, and 99% of them were the Glazers, which obviously I would be putting into agree. But we've spoken about the Glazers endlessly, haven't we? Let's talk about this suggestion from Julio, who says Ten Hag is the problem. No, he's not. If we're talking off the field, like I said, the Glazers, very clearly the biggest issue at Man United by a country mile. But if we're talking on the field, the biggest issue for United is injuries. The injuries at the back for United have meant that the new system that was being worked on is out of the window. The structure is totally gone. The balance is a myth. Not having a left back and having to play Amrabat at left back is so far from ideal that it's almost comical. It's throwing the entire midfield balance off, and because of that, the forward line's not working either. I think another big problem is the form of Marcus Rashford. Fabulous player, but just seems a little bit low in confidence right now. Got to find a way of getting that back. If you look at the game against Galatasaray midweek, I actually don't think much of that at all lies at the door of Erik Ten Hag. The individual errors are so costly. The injuries are so large. The problems are so massive off the field at United that it feels to me as a United fan, Erik Ten Hag is almost the least culpable. It feels like he's scrambling from problem to problem, injury to off the field drama, that he just can't get any stability, any structure, and therefore any development. He is in a nightmare position right now, and I actually just feel sorry for him. Let's talk about Newcastle, because CBNUFC sent in this suggestion. He said, no CB depth. Botman out for a month at least. One more injury away from Paul Dummett playing in front of the yellow wall. Yeah, I agree with this one. The centre-back depth is a problem and was a problem this summer that, we talked about on Football Daily quite heavily, didn't we? They were linked with players, the likes of Kim, what a signing he would have been. And Botman's injury does mean that they look a little bit thin there. They can play Dan Burn at centre-back, so I don't think it's going to get to a stage where we see Paul Dummett, especially with the arrival of Lewis Hall in the summer. But certainly it's something they're going to address in January. I think they're definitely going to dip back into the market and look to sign a central defender. Because as good as Fabian Schär and Lascelles were against PSG, I think in the long run, the absence of Botman, both on the ball and his physicality off the ball, is an issue. So I agree with this one. Forest, Gareth, the Forest fan, says a small but vocal number of fans casting doubt over the manager when they forget we'd still be wallowing in mid-table championship where we've been for years if we didn't have him. I don't know how big that vocal core is, but if it is large, I'll agree with it because I think it's ridiculous to be questioning Steve Cooper. I think he has done an astounding job. A really astounding job. Sure, this season, the chance creation a little bit low. We'd like to see a little bit more from the three behind Taiwo Awoniyi, but he looks sensational. There seems to be balance back in this Forest side. The City ground is a very difficult place to be. And like Gareth says, prior to Steve Cooper, they were nowhere. Yes, he's had massive investment in the Premier League, but aim number one last season was stay in the league. Stay in the league, just stay in the league. Anything to stay in the league. He managed it. They stayed in the league. This season, can they progress towards mid-table? Can they get up towards 12th, 13th? At the moment, they're, I think, 12th. And they look good for a mid-table finish, I think, Forest. There are plenty of teams worse than Forest in this league right now. If there are people questioning Steve Cooper, I don't know whether there are, but Gareth, the Nottingham Forest fan, says there are. I'm going to agree with Gareth. Back Cooper, man. For Sheffield United, Finn says the lack of a proper creative midfielder. Oof. Do you know what? I'll agree to a level. Because I think there are loads of problems at Sheffield United. Loads. I think the midfield does look all over the place, though. And the creation is just not happening. There's just no chances being created. Lowest XG, lowest goal scored, lowest chances created, lowest shots. Massive problems in the forward department. And when you take away a player like Iniam Dai, who was so sensational in the Championship, so driven, that is a huge problem. Because he not only scored goals, but he was able to create his own chances and create chances for others. I like Gustavo Harmer, and he started the season well. But they needed more. They did need more. And the pressure now on players like Archer, it's going to be monumental. For Spurs, Lewis Eagland says, squad depth. You can see the drop-off in creativity when Maddison goes off and Son the same. Certainly agree with this one. It's an issue for Tottenham, but the positive for them is I think they can play a maximum of 37 games across the course of the rest of the season. And that's if they were to make the FA Cup final, because of course they're not in Europe and they're already out of the Carabao bubble. So if they get to the final of the FA Cup and smash it in the Prem, they play 37 more games. Even a small squad should be able to deal with that. The problem for them is that their key players, i.e. Basuma, Maddison, are injury-prone players. So they're going to need cover in January. But just get through to January. 13 fixtures left for Spurs until the middle of January. That's it. Get through to January, address the squad depth issue there. But for now, there aren't really many other problems, are there? For West Ham then, Adam Barnett says, too reliant on Antonio in that lone striker role. Ings doesn't fit. And although Mubamu is a very promising player, he's the only other real option to match the style. Certainly agree with this one. Really surprised they didn't bring a striker in the door in the summer, especially when they let Skamaka go out on that loan with an obligation. I suppose that Kudus can play there. I don't think he suits this West Ham style as a 9 at all. So I don't expect him to get any minutes through the middle. And Mikel Antonio, let's start the season okay, but last season we did see the drop. I think back-to-back 10-goal hauls, last season 5 goals. He started this season pretty well. You know, he has scored goals already, which is a big bonus. But if he was injured, the style of play from that number 9, back to goal, bringing others into the game, running the channels, doing the dog work, they just don't have. So, yeah, I agree. Final one is Wolves, and Michael says it's pretty clear the sale of big midfielders while restructuring financially to replace them. He says it's pretty clear. I disagree. Like, the sales were problematic in the summer. They were problematic in the midfield area. To lose Neves and to lose Nunes, that is an issue. But I think Bellegarde looks pretty decent. I think the acquisition of Tommy Doyle was okay. I think that Lamina, Gomez, Traore, although they're not perfect, are serviceable. I think the bigger problem for Wolves is the goals. The striker. That is their biggest problem. It seems like it's always their biggest problem. You know, the front line, the options just are not natural goal scorers. Fabio Silva, he's at 0.3 expected goals this season. No goals scored. His best ever tally was on loan at Anderlecht last year. 7 goals. Cunha, again, 0.3 expected goals this season. I think he's got 1, hasn't he? His best ever tally at Hertha? 7 goals in a full season. Hwang, he's got 4 goals. He started the season brilliantly. You know, mugged Pep Guardiola off last week, didn't he? His best ever tally? 5 goals. Even Kaladzic, he had that one standout season where he scored 16. Other than that, his highest ever league tally, 6 goals. All of the strikers they've got on the books are not natural goal scorers. That is the biggest problem for Wolves. I think the midfield is fairly functional. The backline looks pretty stable. They can't put the ball in the net. And that's the bigger problem. Okay, so that was a bit muddled, that video. Apologies for some of the problems. I don't know whether I explained myself brilliantly well, but if you did enjoy it, please do hit the like button. As I said, if you're a Luton fan, please get involved on the Twitter. I'd love some suggestions. Hit the subscribe button. Thanks very much for watching. We'll see you later. Goodbye.